Bien, bonjour. J'ai le plaisir aujourd'hui d'interviewer le docteur Michael Papadakis qui travaille à l'hôpital Saint-Georges de Londres et qui travaille dans l'équipe du professeur Sharma. J'ai eu l'occasion de collaborer, enfin mon équipe, avec plusieurs reprises sur des travaux que nous avons fait en commun avec l'équipe de Michael Papadakis. Alors cette interview se déroulera en anglais puisque Michael Papadakis ne parle pas français et comme ça vous aurez le plaisir de découvrir mon anglais. Well, I'm very happy to see you today, Michael.
Thank you very much for the invitation to your wonderful conference. It was a really interesting session and I hope that your audience got a lot out of it regarding sports and heart disease.
Well, your lecture concerned the current recommendation for competitive sports for cardiac patients too restrictive. And we know that there is a question. So what is your global opinion about the current recommendations, please?
I think to answer your question in one word, the answer is yes, they are too restrictive. We've got two documents. We've got the ESC document from the European Society of Cardiology and the American document on the other side of the Atlantic. And they both try to tackle a very difficult problem and a very complex problem with very little evidence. So, as such, it is bound that those recommendations, they will try and be as prudent as possible. They will try to prevent as many sudden cardiac deaths in our elite young athletic population. And to do that, they will have to be quite conservative.
And I think it's my opinion, I don't know if you agree, that one of the main problems of this recommendation is that when we have a cardiac disease, we know the absolute risk. However, we do not know the individual risk. And from a global risk, we say to one individual, you must stop or not sports.
Exactly. So ideally, as sports cardiologists, what we want to do, we want to assess our athlete as an individual, and at the end of the consultation and all the investigations, providing him with individualized advice. What can this particular individual do, what sort of sports and at what intensity. Unfortunately though, to be able to do that, you need to have the evidence to back it up, and because we don't necessarily have the evidence to back it up in most of the conditions that we're discussing, particularly genetic conditions such as cardiomyopathies and ion channelopathies, we take a blanket approach, a very homogeneous approach for very heterogeneous disorders, and that's where the problem starts, and that's when the recommendations become quite conservative.
And to your opinion, in which disease do you think that European recommendation, because European recommendations are more restrictive than American recommendation globally, so in which point do you think that our recommendations are too restrictive?
Well, I think our recommendations are generally quite restrictive, but as I said before, they seem to be more restrictive because there is less evidence in genetic conditions. So if you take, for example, cardiomyopathies, and let's take as example hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, because hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is the condition that has been around for longer. We've been investigating patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy for decades now. And still, despite all that effort, it's a very heterogeneous disorder. Each patient is an individual. We know that there are more than 40 genes that cause different sorts of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and so despite investigating for so many years, still we haven't been able to provide individualized advice to our athletes. So for example, we've got an athlete who's got severe hypertrophic cardiomyopathy with significant hypertrophy, and he gets the same sort of advice with someone who has a bit of apical form of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which although most of us think that it's likely to be of less risk, the recommendations are universal. So all those athletes are allowed to do essentially the low intensity and low static sports such as cricket and golf. It is important, however, to highlight that those are recommendations, so they're expert consensus opinion, but that doesn't mean that each individual expert in his own country, in his own setting, has to go with the recommendations, and he cannot form an individualized assessment and provide individualized advice to that particular athletic individual. And I think you'll find out that if you go around Europe and start investigating, interviewing experts, that different people have different approaches, and depends a lot, and that's a very, very poignant point, it depends a lot on the athlete or the patient, if you want, himself. What does he want? Does he want to continue with his sport? And at the end of the day, how much risk is he willing to take? You have to remember that daily there are thousands of people that go skiing in black slopes. They've got a high risk of having an accident, but we have no right to tell them not to do that as long as they've got the full information, the full picture, and they know what the risk involves.
Yeah. And to expand a little bit the discussion, in these old recommendations, we have a lack of new exam, a new evaluation, cardiac evaluation. For example, you spoke about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. For you, do you think that MRI is really important for the risk of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy for sports participation?
Well, as a general rule, I completely agree with you. Those recommendations were devised back in 2005. Now we're almost 10 years onwards. Obviously, our investigative techniques have developed. You mentioned cardiac MRI, which has developed a lot over the past 10 years. And although there are no definitive evidence, there is definitely some evidence to suggest that, for example, scarring or fibrosis seen in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in cardiac MRI, particularly if it's quite extensive, is an associated risk for arrhythmias or sudden cardiac death. So there is no doubt that we need to incorporate those new developed techniques both to the diagnosis and hopefully to the risk stratification of those individuals as well.
Another important point, because I know that people who are looking for us, I have a patient with a cardiac disease. I give him therapeutic, like beta blockers, for example. Am I sure that I can propose to him to to improve his sport participation? So in other words, when you give beta blockers, for example, can you say, okay, you can do competitive sport?
To be honest with you, I don't think you necessarily can, and that's the difficulty of the recommendations. Particularly as far as beta blockers are concerned, you're more likely to cause harm to your athlete in that he won't be able to augment his heart rate and he'll feel more tired. Plus the fact that it gets a bit complicated with the medication that it's allowed within competitive sport. But essentially, I think you have to look at the background disease and decide whether that background disease will allow your athlete to compete. If he needs a beta blocker to treat the disease itself, like for example the long QT syndrome, that beta blocker is recommended for most of them, then use beta blocker. But at least based on the current recommendation, someone with a long QT, the fact that you put him on beta blocker does not qualify them for competitive sport.
Okay. And my last question, what are your wishes for the new recommendation now?
Well, I think we do need new recommendations, and we need new recommendations, as you said, to incorporate the new investigative techniques for diagnosis and risk stratification of different conditions. We need new recommendations in order to try and change some of the recommendations, for example, in particular in athletes with congenital heart disease, in looking at them from a different perspective rather than the traditional perspective that we used up till now. And I think the new recommendations may well be an opportunity for us to rethink certain aspects, particularly as far as the ESC recommendations are concerned. For example, the restriction and the complete restriction of individuals who are genotype positive but phenotype negative. So they've got the gene but they don't have the disease. Although as we usually happens when we discover something new, we're quite certain about it and we follow it. But we now know that genetic testing is not always that clear cut. We know that there is the genetic noise as well, i.e. normal individuals who have mutations that we probably thought before that they were pathological. And also we know that the specific mutations that we thought that put you at increased risk do not necessarily do so. So I don't think we've got the evidence to go by genetic testing. Definitely not for screening individuals, but also not for re-stratifying individuals. And I think that's an important point, and I'm not sure that you can use the lack of evidence to be more restrictive given the relatively low risk. On the other hand, it's important to highlight that still we're lacking lots of evidence, particularly in conditions such as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and ion channelopathies, and unfortunately, I suspect that we will have to remain quite prudent, if you want, or restrictive regarding our recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for your participation.
Thank you very much.
Pour conclure, vous avez vu que, comme l'a dit Michael Papadakis, les recommandations sont anciennes, elles datent de quelques années. Il faut quand même les garder comme des outils, ce n'est pas la vérité. Donc c'est-à-dire qu'il ne faut pas les jeter, il ne faut pas les déchirer, ce n'est pas du tout ce que nous voulions vous faire passer comme message, mais que nous travaillons, ainsi que nos collègues américains, pour réécrire de nouvelles recommandations qui seront un peu mieux adaptées. Merci beaucoup.